Chapter 3. The Haunted Tour. During her more seaworthy days, the RMS Queen Mary crossed the Atlantic 1,000 times over the span of 40 years, the tour guide explained to his captive audience. The crowd followed his banter with a gaggle of habitual oohs and ahs. Eventually, Mike's curiosity ended up getting the better of him, and he slowly migrated his way to the head of the group. Katharina was following close behind her unwitting chaperone, like a newly hatched gosling trotting behind the mother goose. "My name is Hans. Tonight, I'll be the ferryman guiding you down the river Styx. The rules are simple. Keep your eyes and ears open at all times. Keep your hands inside the ride at all times. We'll be exploring the inner bowels of the vessel, and it can be rather easy to get lost. If you stop, I'll try my best to let you catch up. If you get lost, don't worry. I'll add your name to the future ghost stories." Hans paused and waited for the customary chuckles to subside, the kind of laughter you'd hear at a corporate retreat when one of the bosses attempts to tell an off-the-cuff joke. "If you get lost, just follow the red exit signs and make your way back topside. Any questions? No? Great." Hans advanced down a narrow corridor, and the group followed in kind. From the exterior, the vessel seemed so imposing, but the hallways weren't much wider than a normal run-of-the-mill hotel. Mike began to extend his arms as he walked to guesstimate the width of the hallway. His 6-foot wingspan left his fingertips about 8 inches free in either direction. "From top to bottom, the Queen is 180 feet of iron and steel," Hans said while parading the passengers out of the corridor and onto the ship's gloomy deck. At night, the moon beamed bright white fluorescent refractions off the water of Long Beach Harbor. It created this luminescent, reflective glow on the weathered white paint of the hull. The pale white paint cracked across the hull like varicose veins across an old pair of legs. "If any of you are wondering how the ship got her illustrious name, follow me to find out." The words of the tour guide were soaked in the faint wailing of the wind. Each passing breath wafted in the warm sea breeze. "The Queen was named after Mary of Teck, the wife of King George V. Unfortunately, King George died under mysterious circumstances just days before the completion of the vessel. Some conspiracy theorists go so far as to say foul play might have been involved in his tragic demise. Either way, how rather auspicious, don't you think? How do you figure that? It's a haunted ship, right? To have the very person who commissioned the vessel die under mysterious circumstances is quite the lucky coincidence. I'd say that must have boosted ticket sales quite a bit for the first voyage. Katharina found herself bracing a rosy blemish of a blush after her companion's blunderer's lack of self-awareness. She wasn't used to accompanying someone so obviously transparent. She gently covered her mouth with her left hand and clasped her hip bone with her right. She wrapped her arm around her waist like a boa constrictor clamping onto a gazelle. "Oh, did it ever! Some guests even claimed to hear King George roaming the bowels of the ship, searching for his beloved Queen Mary." I found myself in good company with Hans. It was nice to know that someone else shared my taste for dark humor. On May 27, 1936, the Queen Mary departed from Southampton, England, embarking on her maiden voyage. It was the veritable who's who of the time: royals, celebrities, politicians. One of the tourists popped up to the front of the group and asked in an unamused tone of voice, "What makes it so haunted?" The peanut gallery started murmuring like the humming of a choir prior to a dress rehearsal. The tour guide was amused by the question and stopped abruptly at one of the doorways. He placed his hands together like a priest in the middle of a prayer. He slowly raised his head and looked up at the ceiling. "What makes it so haunted? Well, for starters, look up. The curious group of tourists looked up at the ceiling like a bunch of turkeys staring at the rain during a rainstorm. We all found ourselves oafishly looking up at the ceiling, but no one had the slightest clue as to why. It's funny how figures of authority have so much sway over large groups of followers. You're all standing under a piece of history. This is the infamous Goldberg Corridor. The group of tourists looked back at the tour guide with some understandable confusion. Since the first voyage in 1936, there have been 55 recorded deaths aboard the RMS Queen Mary, most of which were crew members. 55 deaths? In fact, the very first death was right about where you're standing at this very moment, Seaman Goldberg. The group subtly sidestepped the former resting place of Seaman Goldberg. The inner workings of the ship was a maze of iron and steel. It was quite the labyrinth. How did it happen? From the reports, it was a run-of-the-mill accident. Seaman Goldberg was discovered around midnight with a fractured skull and other various abrasions. A run-of-the-mill accident? Well, run-of-the-mill for the Queen, anyway, he said, and continued to walk down the corridor at a sluggish pace. Mike subtly nudged Kat and pulled her in close. During the war, she was nicknamed the Grey Ghost on account of her color and the swiftness of her speed. She not only transported troops under the cover of night, but ferried top military secrets between Churchill and Roosevelt. What kind of secrets? Story has it, on October 31st, 1942, the Mary collided head-on with another ship. Sadly, she was forced to leave its crew behind to die at sea. The ship had 430 total crew members. Only 99 of them managed to survive. Left them to die? One of the guests gasped at the gloomy fable. The tour guide started uncomfortably rubbing his jaw with his left hand. His hands were covered in a clammy sweat. I took it he didn't appreciate the guilt by association. The nickname, the Grey Ghost, was more than well deserved. It was a different time. It was a desperate time. It was a time of war. Kat pulled me in closer. I took it she was uneasy by the newfound lineage of her employer. The tour guide crept into center focus of the tour guests. He stood directly in front of two double doors and right under a sign that read, Ballroom. Who here likes to dance? Kat grabbed my hand and pulled us to the front of the pack. To be honest, I wasn't much of a dancer. Someone once told me I had 2 left feet and neither one of them knew how to dance. By all accounts, from my previous entanglements, that seemed to track. Good. You're all in for a treat, he said while pulling open the large double doors. The door made a large creaking sound as they careened open. We followed the tour guide into the ballroom like a bunch of eager teenagers piling into a dance hall. The tour guide waltzed to the center of the dance floor and stood under a large circular light. The light laced the room in a dim white glow, just enough light to make out the rough details of the room's decor. From time to time, the ballroom has been known to host a special kind of guest. Over the years, thousands of guests have reported seeing a particular apparition. On one of those occasions, she was caught in a photograph, allegedly. Legend has it, as it goes, she was one of many upper-class socialites. Some guests report seeing her in the mirror of the first-class lounge. She looms over the dance floor, waiting for a dance partner that will never come, he said in an ominous tone of voice. How utterly tragic, Kat excreted emotionally. You could say that again, Mike replied. Now, follow me. On to the infamous room B474. Does anyone have the pleasure of staying in room B474? One of the guests at the back of the group reached into his pocket and pulled out a room key. The guest vigorously inspected the key, like a choir skimming over last-minute changes to a music sheet. To his dismay, the number scribbled down on the key was B474. He gulped and raised his hand into the air. "We're in room B474. I'm going to have to apologize in advance. Please, right this way." The guests start blushing, and the group navigated out of the ballroom down to room B474. The ballroom was centrally located on the B floor. The hallways adorned a crimson and purple checkered patterned carpet. As we progressed towards room B474, the carpet acted more like an optical illusion rather than a yellow brick road. The handles of the doors had recently been polished. The newly finished shine of the brass doorknobs sparkled under the dimly lit hallway lights. The lights were vintage cast iron Art Deco. Each light had 3 large, opal-shaped light bulb covers in a triangular pattern. As we passed from room to room, each of the guests quietly counted down the doors. On our left, the odd numbers, and on the right, the even-numbered rooms. B468, B470, B472, B474. Here we go. Now what you're about to hear is as tragic as it is true, so I do not say it lightly, nor do I say these things in jest. The words of the tour guide had a profound effect on the demeanor of the group. We stood poised and patiently waited entry into suite B474. I pulled Kat in close and whispered in her ear. "You heard of this place or what?" "Can't say that I'm familiar." "Now, without further ado," he said while opening the room up for further inspection. I had to say, my heart was skipping a beat or two. That kind of fluttering you get when you're about to get up in front of an audience and give a presentation. The door flung open to the suite. You could hear a pin drop in the hallway. The guests were as silent as family mourning an open casket. For inside the room was just a normal room. I'm not sure what all the fanfare was about. The room looked run-of-the-mill to me. I looked back at Kat and then over to the tour guide for some kind of cue. This is the infamous room B474. So, what's the story? The tour guide scoffed at my brazen question. I figured he wasn't thinking someone would have the gall to ask. I never basked in the misery of others' ignorance, but I was starting to get the feeling the tour guide derived some pleasure from being a know-it-all. It was a night, not too much unlike tonight. The salty sea air breeze blew through the hallways. The taste of the salty humidity was as palpable as it was potent. The tour guide stepped to the side of the room and placed his hands behind his back. He began to stare up at the ceiling and ponder his next line. It was clear he wanted to be intentional about his choice of words. How he managed to give the same speech hundreds of times per year and remain genuinely interested was beyond me. Room B474 looks like an ordinary room on its face. The beds are tucked away, the chairs put in their places, curtains drawn back, peaceful, pristine, and elegant. However, that all changed on the night of October 31st, 1967. Halloween? Yes, Halloween. The last Halloween voyage of the RMS Queen Mary. Legend has it, 4 passengers entered suite B474. By all accounts, healthy individuals. By all accounts, happy individuals. By all accounts... What happened? We don't know exactly. The crew reports were sketchy at best. However, foul play was suspected. You don't know what happened, but you suspect foul play? All we know for certain is that 4 individuals entered B474 on Halloween night, checked in for the voyage, and embarked from London to Long Beach. And? And none of them disembarked the voyage at the port of Long Beach. We know they ordered room service around 7 p.m. on Halloween night. The dinner was delivered at 7:45 p.m. to room B474. For all intents and purposes, the guests received the room service, tipped to the concierge, and were never seen again. Couldn't they have gotten off the ship and someone forgot to check them out? Unfortunately, no. No, they could not have. How can you be so certain? One of our employees, a deckhand, found the room abandoned mid-trip. That's how. We scoured the ship looking for the missing guests. At first, we assumed they were just walking around. After 10 hours of searching, we couldn't find a single trace of the passengers. They vanished, like ghosts in the darkness. Mike gazed around the room for any signs of a struggle or remnants of ancient clue. The other guests were flabbergasted by the tall tale. On its face, it wasn't elusively unbelievable, nor utterly inconceivable. Mike noticed out of the corner of his eye a curmudgeonly old woman mopping the deck. She looked completely out of place, even for a ghost tour. I gently slowed my pace and snagged onto Kat's arm with a warm embrace. She wrapped my arms snugly around her body. The soft touch of her silk dress was surprisingly cold as it was sleek. I slowly wandered over to the mysterious stranger like a child searching for a corner piece of a jigsaw puzzle scattered on the floor. "We don't see a lot of youngsters these days. What brings y'all by this evening?" she asked while mopping the deck. The question startled me at first. Normally, I found myself somewhat witty and quick on my feet. In this case, I had nothing to say. Kat stepped in and said, "My husband and I are celebrating our wedding anniversary." "Newlyweds, congratulations!" I put my infatuation aside and quickly began to play along with my new wife. I didn't figure someone like Kat would be so quick on her feet. It's that, or she really is crazy in the head. The good-looking ones almost always are. Yup, me and the old ball and chain. Thought we'd go out for a change and explore all that Long Beach had to offer. The deckhand discontinued her mopping and propped herself up by holding onto the top of the mop with both hands. The years of manual labor had taken a noticeable toll on the old lady. The decades of corrosive salty air soaked and stained her skin. The tips of her ends were split open like freshly mowed blades of grass. The deckhand scrunched her brow and asked, "You look familiar. Do we know each other?" "I don't think so. I just started at the front desk about a week ago." "Wonderful. I started at the front desk too. Was quite some time ago, though. About 1964 or 65. "That's some job security," Mike replied. "Well, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. That's what I always say." "How funny. My grandmother used to say the same thing," Kat delightfully declared to the sea hag. "Your grandmother sounds like a smart cookie." "You can say that again," Kat responded. "You've probably seen quite a bit over that time. People, things, happenings," Mike said curiously. "That's an understatement. I'm probably about to retire. Maybe 1 week or so to go. I just need to train my replacement and I can sail off into the sunset." Mike was somewhat flabbergasted by her proclamation. I mean, how could someone dedicate the better part of their life to working at the same company? I found the entire concept to be rather repulsive, yet reluctantly respectable. "I don't want to be rude, but are you taking the ghost tour?" the deckhand said. "We are. The haunted ghost tour," Mike replied. "Your tour group is galloping away," she said while pointing to the distant group. "Oh yeah, we should probably get going." "By all means. Last thing I want to do is interrupt your fun. Get on and go enjoy your honeymoon." "It was great meeting you," Mike said while waving back to the deckhand. "Word for the wise. Don't want to get lost down here, kiddos." Kat and Mike scurried back to the tour group like a couple of ducklings flocking back to a gaggle of ducks. Luckily, the group was small enough to make the absence of the two people unnoticed. The weather report was a lot like tonight, actually. That is, of course, minus the terrifying torrential typhoon season. The typhoon season in '67 was as devastating as any in modern recorded history. The Queen left Southampton for the last time on 31st of October, 1967, and sailed to the port of Long Beach.